Welcome back to Bombastic Nation and Ting and Ting and Ting. I'm Mr. Giant and I'm back with some more vibes for all you. And we back with the Hannibal series. You know, this one is called The Battle of Cannae again, 2016 BC. This is chapter 3. The Carnage. Ooh, there's going to be some carnage. This is part 13. And when we left off the last time, they played a little cat and mouse game. You know, the Romans went and built another camp, you know, and Hannibal moved sort of close to them, sent people out, you know, to go harass the forgers and stuff like that, humiliated the Romans once again. And at the ending, the Romans says, tomorrow we fight. So this is probably what they mean by the carnage that are coming. Let's go ahead and YouTube and simmer and see what's going on with this.
Hey guys, the Battle of Cannae has 3 chapters. If you missed the previous one, you can find it here. On a sweltering August 2nd, the battle standard in front of Varro's tent signaled to the troops to array for battle. As the gusts of southwesterly Volturnus wind raised clouds of fine dust across the dry Apulian soil,
Got
for
an
the
itch.
next several hours, army officers closely supervised the complex deployment to ensure that the legions would form in the correct order. Varro and the rest of the Roman leadership decided to show the enemy their willingness to fight. However, they had no way of knowing if the Carthaginians would accept a battle in this new location. But then, Hannibal led his troops through the gates.
Oh yeah.
And as a
Here
fan
we
of
go.
our channel, you should definitely check out
Here we
our
go.
friends over at Curiosity Stream, my personal favorite streaming service that features thousands of documentaries geared towards the City Stream. And by registering, you'll also be supporting our channel. The two armies crossed the river Aufidius at various points and marched onto the dust-blown flat plain below the town of Cannae. Yet the Romans still weren't sure that Hannibal would give battle, so they left a 10,000-strong garrison in the main camp. It was Paulus who insisted on this, arguing that besides guarding the baggage, this force could also threaten Hannibal's camp and cut off his line of retreat once the battle went in favor of the Romans. However, Hannibal wasted no time in deploying his army, sending out his light troops to form a protective screen for the main body. Varro too sent out the Velites to mask the process of deployment from the enemy. There are suggestions that the Roman leadership didn't actually expect the more mobile Carthaginians to fight on such a narrow and confined battlefield, and merely wanted to deploy the legions in front of the enemy to boost morale and rebuild their confidence, after being humiliated the day before for refusing to fight. Such practices of building up the confidence of the men were common in the battles of this period, but it is far more probable that the Romans did, in fact, fully intend to fight this battle on the ground of their own choosing. Whatever the case, Hannibal is said to have had 40,000 infantry and 10,000 horse, while the Romans fielded around 70,000 infantry
Lord.
and 6,400 cavalry. Varro placed a screen of around 15,000 Velites in front of the main line. 4,000 allied horse were positioned on the left under his direct command, while Paulus was in charge of the 2,400 Roman cavalry deployed on the right. To compensate for their numerical inferiority, the squadrons of horsemen were packed in a tighter formation, with no more than 1.5 meters between each rider. Room to maneuver the horses wasn't necessary, as their role would be purely defensive, while the infantry drove the attack forward. Regular Roman infantry was mixed with the cavalry to give more stability to the static squadrons. Servilius commanded the 55,000 Roman legionaries and allied troops in the centre, arrayed in a much deeper and more tightly packed triplex Achis. Varro used the overstrength maniples to add depth to the infantry formations. Furthermore, he reduced the gaps between the lines to bring the full weight of the legions to bear, aiming to overwhelm the enemy. He knew that at Trasimene, the Roman heavy infantry held off the Carthaginians for hours, inflicting significant losses, despite being in an unfavorable position.
Man, can you imagine the war room the night before? I mean, it seems like back then there was a lot more planning. Because today technology does a lot of the work, you know what I mean? But back then they probably sat down and ate and drank and smoked and really plan out everything to the minuscule detail, you know what I mean, and thing, and hoping that the strategy that they pick actually works. But I think they would think that it would be, they're confident it will work because they actually studied the enemy. But in this case, it seems like the Romans haven't really studied Hannibal because he keeps ambushing them. Like we going into this battle here, and I expect my man to do something unexpected because he has such a significantly smaller force than them. So I want to see what he have up his sleeve here that's going to come at them. Let's get back into this here and thing.
Was inflicting significant losses despite being in an unfavorable position. And the year prior to that at Trebia, the legions hacked their way through the Carthaginian centre, getting the better of both the Gauls and several contingents of Libyans, Hannibal's best infantry. It's worth noting that the tighter maniple formations restricted the tactical flexibility, but eased the coordination of the massive army, and, more importantly, the deeper formations possessed longer endurance in a direct confrontation. Thus, the Roman leadership was confident that the legions can outmatch the enemy and crush Hannibal's centre yet again.
Crush him.
To achieve this,
Let's see.
Varro chose the battlefield wisely. He packed the legions on a narrow front, with the river and the hills near Cannae protecting the flanks from envelopment. This would force the Carthaginian horsemen into a frontal charge, and the Roman cavalry was tasked with delaying long enough for the legions to finish the job. If they could break through the Punic centre, it wouldn't matter if the weaker Roman horse lost a fight on the wings, because at that point the Carthaginian cavalry couldn't do much more than harass the large block of legions. The selection of the battleground at Cannae could allow the heavy infantry to smash their Punic enemy. We do not know if Varro alone
Smash the puny enemy.
or if he was assisted by Paulus, Servilius, and other members of the Roman leadership. The Roman plan was simple but efficient. Meanwhile, Hannibal placed around 6,000 Spanish skirmishers and up to 2,000 renowned Balearic slingers as a screening force in front of the army, instructing them to raise as much dust as possible to hide the disposition of the troops.
He's using Mother Nature.
9 of them formed the close order infantry, with 21,000 Gallic warriors making up the bulk of the main line. 3,000 veteran Spanish infantry were interspersed to strengthen the centre. But, unlike at Trebia, where his main line collapsed because he amassed all of his infantry to try and match the Romans, and didn't keep any reserves for decisive action and to plug the gaps in the line, this time he positioned the 8,000 Libyans, his best, most disciplined men, in the rear, hiding them from view behind the formations in the
He
front.
had something up his sleeve.
On the Punic right were 4,000 Numidian horsemen, commanded by Hanno, tasked with holding the flank, while on the opposite side, the Carthaginian general placed 2,000 Spanish and 4,000 Gallic cavalry under the command of Hasdrubal, planning to overload the left flank in a direct attack on the Roman right, hoping to smash the enemy cavalry and threaten the legions from the rear. Neither side was intimidated by the other. Gallic and Spanish troops had the confidence of past victories against the legions, while the Romans trusted in their superior numbers, remembering that even in prior defeats, their heavy infantry often prevailed in hand-to-hand combat against the Punic troops. Then, around midday, like a lumbering beast, the Roman formation moved forward.
Yeah. And thus it
Carthaginian
begins.
cavalry on the left led the line, trotting at pace, while the light infantry of both armies moved ahead of the main lines to open the engagement. Now, hidden behind the dust raised by the screen of skirmishers, Hannibal made his move, advancing with the main line to form a crescent formation that would bulge towards the enemy. He understood that the Romans chose this narrow battlefield to deploy their army as a battering ram, and that his outnumbered infantry stood no chance of stopping the legions if they tried matching them man for man. Therefore,
I wonder, comment down below. I wonder if they choose battlefields like they choose here, taking into consideration the resources they have as far as people and different segments of the military. Do they choose the battlefield like they do there? Because like you said, that the Romans chose this battlefield specifically so that they could use their numbers as a battering ram. Is that done any these days? Comment down below, because most of you all that watch this with me seem to be more versed in military vibe. I mean, I'm just watching this and being intrigued by it. But comment down below and tell me.
bulged line was supposed to absorb the attack and then slowly retreat, to buy time until the cavalry attack on the left unfolded. Hannibal personally commanded the troops in the center, with the help of his youngest brother Mago, for these troops would bear the brunt of the Roman assault, and it was vital that they held out as long as possible. As the skirmishing between the light troops began in the middle of the field, Carthaginian riders on the left advanced full tilt towards the Roman citizen cavalry. With veteran officers leading the way, the Spanish and Gallic squadrons stayed compact, doubling up on and dispersing the first lines of Roman horsemen, quickly penetrating their formation.
Wow.
Some of the Roman riders dismounted to fight on foot, but the Carthaginians swarmed their positions, dragging their opponents from their seats. But despite outnumbering the Romans 3-1, the confined space largely negated the numerical advantage of the Punic riders, and Hasdrubal did well to tightly control his men, managing to overwhelm the Romans in a brief, furious charge. The Roman cavalry couldn't cope, and most of them broke and fled, with the Carthaginians now in hot pursuit. Others huddled together to hold off the Punic onslaught for as long as possible. Paulus himself escaped the carnage with his retinue and moved to rejoin the fighting in the center. Meanwhile, on the opposite flank, the Numidians pinned down the allied Italian cavalry with hit and run attacks, with neither side able to gain an advantage. In the center, after a long exchange of projectiles, the skirmishers retreated behind the close order infantry as the Roman legions closed in. The massed ranks of legionaries must have been an intimidating sight, advancing slowly while clashing their weapons against the wooden shields, whilst the trumpeters added to the cacophony of noise. As an almost solid mass of rank upon rank of armored legionaries clashed with the enemy, Hannibal's advanced center narrowed the width of the initial contact, reducing the deadly momentum of the Roman attack. The bare-chested Gauls hacking at the enemy with their long slashing swords, and the Spanish in their white tunics thrusting forward with their short blades, stood firm and held back the enemy for a time. But as more Roman troops entered the fray, the weight of the legions drove back the mixed Punic formation. Roman velators supported the attack, while the Carthaginian light footmen were ordered to reinforce the flanks of the infantry. Hannibal and his officers barked orders at the men, telling them to stand off the Roman assault and slowly move back. Already overwhelmed by the wall of scutum shields pushing them back, ordering the troops to retreat further in the face of the enemy was fraught with risks. All it would take is a few men buckling under pressure to cause slight cracks in the line that could quickly break the formation and turn into a rout. But the Carthaginian general and his Punic captains led from the front, fighting alongside the troops in the first lines, encouraging the men to hold their nerve, carefully controlling their withdrawal. Hannibal knew that he had to stay in the fight and buy time until events elsewhere on the field unfolded, and for now, the line held. Close to the hills on the right, the light Numidian horsemen fought in small groups, throwing their javelins and rapidly retreating before the enemy could pin them down. However, their attacks caused very little damage, and Varro simply remained in place, making no effort to drive them back. The main role of the Roman cavalry was to prevent the enemy from flanking the infantry formation long enough until the main assault of the legions broke through the center. But on the other flank, the superior Carthaginian horse have by now decimated the Roman cavalry, completely routing them from the field. Next, Hasdrubal could move against the rear of the Roman center.
Oh, here we go.
To help surround Varro's
Still flanking him.
cavalry on the right.
Still flanking
First,
them.
he had to regroup and allow his men and horses time to rest, who were by now exhausted from pursuing the fleeing enemy cavalry. Back in the center, as the Carthaginian infantry fell back before them, the Romans pressed on, prodding and cutting through the retreating enemy line. Sword in hand, the centurions and tribunes shouted orders through the deafening noise of the screams and the clattering of weapons, urging the maniples to charge together, sending more and more men into the concaved Punic center, which seemed like it will soon break. Conversely, Hannibal and Mago pushed the men to resist a while longer, trying to gain every precious second, hoping that the Spanish and Gallic cavalry will come to their aid. But as more and more legionaries were drawn inwards, the Roman breakthrough was inevitable, and the pressure on the center finally broke the Punic line. The Gauls and Spanish at first moved back facing the enemy, with flurries of fighting still occurring, but before long they turned and routed. With the enemy now on the run, Paulus and Servilius poured more men into the gap, refusing to give the Carthaginians any chance to rally and reform their lines. The overcrowded Roman center surged forward into the salient.
Well, that's some serious narration there.
The side of the gaping hole managed to maintain their lines, but were nevertheless forced to retreat in good order. Meanwhile, up the field, Hasdrubal had reformed his squadrons and charged
here he come, here he come.
Realizing that he could not move
I'm
against
picking
the
sides
legions
in this
center
historical
before the
war.
threat of Roman cavalry was removed. Until now, Varro successfully held the flank, but seeing the incoming Carthaginians, the consul knew that the Roman cavalry on the other wing must have routed, and he could not see what was going on in the center. Unsure if the day was lost, and facing annihilation himself against a force 3 times his own, Varro fled the field.
Oh.
The Numidians gave chase, while Hasdrubal once again had to stop to rest and reform his cavalry, before he could turn them towards the rear of the Roman infantry. Back in the center, legionaries in their tens of thousands pressed forward to complete the rout of the enemy. As they advanced into the gap, the maniples lost all cohesion, turning into a disorganized mob that rushed forward, with their officers barely able to control small groups of men in their own immediate vicinity. This mattered little, however, as the Romans could taste victory, having punched straight through the enemy's center. Hannibal relied on trickery and ruse in his cry of victories, but it now seemed that the clear field at Cannae offered no possibility for him to set up an ambush. But as the mass of Romans streamed forward, they found themselves between the columns of Libyan infantry that moved against the pursuing troops. Incredibly, the Carthaginian general outwitted the Romans yet again.
Once again, oh my God!
The
Another.
position of the Libyans behind his troops in the front, and using the clouds of dust raised by the fighting.
And now they're coming in the rear.
Infantry from the enemy on an open field, luring the greatest army Rome has ever assembled into an ambush set in plain view, in effect letting the legions outflank themselves. As the Libyans pressed the overextended and disorganized mass on both sides, the momentum of the Roman attack dissolved, and the troops were no longer under anyone's control. Hannibal and Mago rallied most of the routing Gallic and Spanish troops, turning to rejoin the fighting, while on the opposite side of the field, Hasdrubal charged into the rear of the enemy infantry.
Oh, wow, just turn and run.
The utter defeat of the Roman army was now inevitable. With the maniples hopelessly intermingled, they could no longer reform their lines. To make matters worse, Libyan troops looked similar to Roman legionaries, having been equipped with Roman armor, helmets and shields that they stripped from the dead at Trebia, Trasimene and Geronium. The legionaries felt they were no longer protected on the flanks, and with the enemy seemingly amongst them, their nervousness soon turned to panic. Hannibal turned the strength of the Roman infantry, their deep, overwhelming formation, against them. As their ranks contracted under the pressure of multiple attacks,
That's just serious killing right there, no.
tried in vain to improvise, as movement became ever harder in the confined space. Paulus and Servilius fought heroically, leading a stiff resistance, but both were eventually cut down during the fighting. Small groups of legionaries tried forming rough formations, but most were too exhausted and stood no chance against the fresh Libyans who were kept in reserve for most of the day. Some of the Roman troops, weary and fatigued, simply gave up, no longer having the strength to raise their weapons. As the hours passed, the battle became a one-sided massacre. The fighting went on until dark. There was little to no tactical sophistication in this final stage of the battle, as the Carthaginians systematically slaughtered most of the trapped infantry. In the end, widespread Roman resistance collapsed, and those who had any strength left in them managed to flee towards the Roman camps and the nearby towns. Hannibal had won an unbelievable victory.
Yeah. Woo.
By sundown, some 50,000 Roman infantry and 2,700 cavalry lay dead or dying on the field at Cannae. The gory sight gave pause even to the most hardened of observers, as nearly 3,000 tons of human flesh was left to rot in the August sun, the true fruits of Hannibal's tactical masterpiece. But achieving this slaughter cost Hannibal dearly. 5,700 of his men fell, a high figure for a victorious army in ancient times, which is testament to the harsh fighting on the day. Although it is worth noting that the Carthaginians were significantly outnumbered until the very end of the battle, which also played a role in the relatively high casualties for Hannibal's army. Nevertheless, the Roman leadership was decimated. Consul Paulus, Proconsul Servilius, and Marcus Minucius Rufus were killed in the battle, along with 80 senators, 2 quaestors, 29 out of 48 military tribunes, some 300 equestrians, with many others captured and enslaved. Never has there been a defeat that struck so hard at the very heart of Roman society. And as night fell on August 2nd, 216 BC, Rome's very future was left in doubt. Credit goes to our awesome patrons who make videos like this one possible.
Wow, he outsmarted them again when they had the absolute Numbers, absolute numbers, and he outsmarted them. I think their eagerness to maintain their pride sort of got to them. I'm going to just steamroll through there, and my man is sitting there thinking, what can I do? And he made his plan. Wow. I don't hear people talk about the Carthaginians much anymore. Well, I wonder what they evolved into. Comment down below and let me know, because I'm not versed on that. So help me out, people. Comment down below. You know what I mean? Thank you all for watching this with me. Hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. I'll leave the link in the description so you can go check out this series and thing, because if you pull it up, it's going to bring up all the series to you. Hope you guys had a good weekend. Cool runnings.